You're listening to the Sass Says podcast. I'm your host, Christy Rocha, also known as Sass. I identify as a woman, a wife, and a mother. That should tell you a lot already. And over the last few years, I've learned the value of talk therapy. I have seen how my inner work not only enhances my own well-being, but also my marriage, my parenting, my relationships. And in fact, you wouldn't be hearing this right now if it weren't for the work I've done. My mission is to debunk the misconceptions and stigmas around what therapy is and who it's for. Let's normalize working on our mental health and seeking help when needed. We've all heard of self-care, self-help, and self-love, but do you often wonder how to actually make it all happen? I do. You'll hear strategy-based conversations with professionals, as well as inspiring and validating stories from women who are just like you and me. Think of this podcast as the weekly therapy sessions you didn't know you needed, with a dash of sass, a lot of vulnerability, and me, relentlessly asking, but how? Hello. All right, my guest today is Keisha Blair. Keisha is the award-winning best-selling author of Holistic Wealth, 32 Life Lessons to Help You Find Purpose, Prosperity, and Happiness, and the Holistic Wealth Personal Workbook. She is a trained economist with extensive experience in the public, private, and not-for-profit sectors. She is the founder of the Keisha Blair Institute on Holistic Wealth and is a graduate of the Executive Leadership Program at Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government. Keisha has been featured in the New York Times, Harvard Business Review, Essence Magazine, The Wall Street Journal, and many other publications. Woo! Her book, Holistic Wealth, has won multiple awards, including award-winning finalist in the 2020 Best Book Awards and award-winning finalist in the 2020 International Book Awards self-help categories. Keisha is a mom of 3 and lives in Ottawa, Canada. Okay, so Keisha today shares the story of her first husband's sudden passing when she was just 31 years old with a 3-year-old and an 8-week-old newborn. This is such an incredible story of resilience. You will hear how Keisha grieved, healed, coped, and ultimately learned to thrive. She shares with us what holistic wealth means. We talk about money trauma, money stories, the connection between money and mental health, money and death, and how to discover your personal money philosophy and why it matters. All right. This conversation is so moving. I know you're going to love it. And once you've heard it and have decided you loved it, please rate, review, and subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on. And until then, here's Keisha. Hey, Keisha. So nice to meet you. Thank you for being here with me today.
It's great to be here, Christy. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I am not really explored this topic at all on the show, so I am really looking forward to getting into it with you. Why don't we start for the listeners who may not have read your book or seen your viral blog post? Tell us a little bit about your story and why and how you are sitting here today.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to share. So my journey has been just an incredible one. I started writing, years and years ago. And it's funny. So my husband passed away uh, from a very, very rare illness. So this illness is so rare that most doctors will never see it in their lifetime in a living patient, only in textbooks. And he passed away at the age of 34, just 8 weeks after I gave birth to my second child. So it was sudden, it was devastating, as you can imagine. As a new mom, I was just 31 and just starting out. We were just starting out our lives as a couple, and then that happens. And after taking some time, and in the book, once your listeners have a chance to read it, you'll see that I took a sabbatical. And it was after that, after doing lots of soul searching and thinking about what I wanted my life to look like, it was after that I wrote that viral article. So it was originally posted on Thrive Global, And the title was My Husband Died at age 34. Here are 40 life lessons I learned from it. I didn't think anyone would read it. I simply posted it. It was the most vulnerable piece of writing, though, that I'd ever done. I really bared my emotions in that article. And of course, then, I got emails coming in from the Medium editors at first saying, we want to do a recording. It's one of our best stories for the entire year. And then it just, it went viral after that. And so that's what got me on this journey too. And, an agent said, this is the book you should write. So I was writing a memoir for years. She said, put down that manuscript to write this book. And we got that book out there, and that's the holistic wealth message that we're going to discuss today. And it's just been unbelievable because my professional background too. So I'm a trained economist. And so it's just marrying the skills of my profession with my personal experience to try to empower women and moms and everyone else in terms of, recovery and what it means to live a life of holistic wealth and, getting control of those personal finances and while doing the same with our mental health and our physical health and our emotional health and our spiritual health, which is also a part of it, as well as our relationships. So that's basically it, like kind of like condensed
Yeah,
into
the
like
short version.
a minute. Yeah, the very short version, because that was over like a 10-year period.
Wow.
And yeah, so that's what got this process started.
All right. And thank you for sharing. And we are going to get into holistic wealth, but I would like to go back first. So at this point, how long ago was that he passed?
13 years.
13 years ago. Okay. And, going back to 13 years now, you have a 3-year-old and an 8-week-old. He's suddenly just gone. He passes. And I also heard that you actually didn't know his cause of death for a year.
Absolutely. So it was a medical mystery. It was a medical investigation. It took them one whole year to complete the autopsy, and they took the top specialists from Canada and the United States and forensic pathologists and the top coroners in Canada, married them with a team in the United States and sent it to the United States. So they sent some, the specimen to the United States for testing. And it all took one year. And in that year, as you can imagine, there were so many questions from people, from family members. And they had so many different conspiracy theories because nobody knew the cause of this seemingly healthy young man who was fit as a fiddle, ran marathons, and was very healthy. And it took one year, and it just goes to show you, how unpredictable life is. And I think we've been seeing that level of disruption now with COVID-19. And it really reminds me of that. You know how when COVID started, nobody knew what this was, and it took us a while to even figure out what we were dealing with, and then the cause, and then the cure, and then what we needed to do. And that's what my year looked like, except I did it alone, not with a collective group of the world,
Right.
and just with, family members. But that's what that disruption and that uncertainty felt like to me. So with COVID-19, it's almost like, reliving that process.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, in trying to put myself in your shoes, I can come up with some pretty intense, challenges about the situation you are in, right? What would surprise us to know that was challenging about that time period, or that was hard for you? Like, I don't know. I feel like that time period of having a toddler and being a new mom and then having the newborn, it's like that's challenging for anyone. And then add this to it, you know, I don't know what sticks out in your mind as being like the hardest thing you had to overcome during that time.
Yeah, there's so many things swirling as you're asking me that question. It's so hard to pick one.
Yeah.
But as you mentioned, I was a young mom. And what was challenging most was, as I said, not only fielding questions and assumptions about what happened, but was, dealing with, and when you're dealing with grief, this happens so much, right? Dealing with different comments, different types of advice that people
Mm,
would give.
mm-hmm,
And sometimes it was not helpful.
mm-hmm,
And I know it was coming from a good place. And I speak a lot about that in the book, in Holistic Wealth, both in chapter 2, in terms of the naysayers and things that, people will say once you're going through any form of life altering setback. Um, and also at the end of the book when I explore relationships some more. But I think that was the most surprising for me, some of the comments that I got as a young mom dealing with the loss of a husband. And it's so strange sometimes what people zero in on, right? But you know what it does? It really forces you to identify who your real friends are
mm,
and who are the people who are cheering you along in your corner. And some of those people are still around today. And so it's amazing when you go through this type of setback, how your relationships come to the fore and the value of those that are really, really rooting for you, are really, really in your corner, the ones that show up and say, I'm spending the night so that you can get some sleep. Because I was dealing with an 8-week old and I couldn't sleep.
yeah,
My husband had died, and the ones that came forward, the friends and the family members who came forward and said, we're spending the night so you can get a night of sleep.
mm-hmm,
And we'll stay up and we'll feed the baby. Like we'll do the 2-hour feedings every 2 hours so that you can just even get one night of rest.
mm-hmm,
And so it's unbelievable once you go through this. And of course, nobody anticipates this,
right,
but it's this severe level of exhaustion. And it calls for those around you to really step up in a big way to just kind of remove those big hurdles,
mm-hmm,
those day-to-day hurdles that you don't anticipate. But when people come forward and they're like, yeah, I'm going to remove this one hurdle for you today.
mm-hmm,
And that's why relationships are so critical to this framework that I've developed around holistic wealth,
mm-hmm,
because I really saw the cheerleaders and I saw some of, the negative points too. So that
mm-hmm,
stands out in my mind as something that maybe people wouldn't be thinking about necessarily, but that you go through with
mm-hmm,
these types of things. Yeah.
yeah. And so you took time off to grieve and,
Mhm.
you know, raise your kids and kind of get a handle on things. Like, what did you actually do in that year to cope, to heal, to grieve, to survive? Like, what were the things that you actually did on either a day-to-day or even on a bigger picture, just spirit, like self-development, things like that? Like, what did you actually go through and do during that time?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so once readers get into the book, they'll see the narrative too and the story. But this was a big, big planning exercise to take this sabbatical. Like I literally spent my year in Jamaica. So I moved my life for
Wow.
a year,
Mm-hmm.
and I rented my home to a nice young couple and packed up my things in a 40-foot container, destined for Jamaica with my stuff, my kids stuff. So
Wow.
you can imagine that was huge. It was a big deal. And so while I was there, I was in a different environment. I wasn't in the same house. I wasn't in the same city. So that helped. And of course, while I was there, being in a different environment, in a tropical place with lots of nature around me, the trees, the beach, the ocean, spending a lot of time hiking and in nature just helped clear up a lot of answers for me. I remember thinking, wow, I originally felt betrayed by nature when he died. It was the dawn of spring and flowers were blooming. I
Mm-hmm.
thought, how can you be blooming now when my
Mm.
world is dead? And
Oh,
when I
I just
went
got a
on
chill.
sabbatical, yeah, when I went on sabbatical and I renewed that love of nature, I felt like I got some answers there, feeling like I was one and he was one with nature and that
Mm.
we're all a part of this bigger story. And it wasn't just the hiking and spending time in nature, it was the meditation and prayer. And I rediscovered my intuition.
Mm.
So I got up every morning and I meditated for 3 whole hours. I mean, it sounds long, but I had time and I got up really early, the
Right.
same time every morning, meditating. and just, like looking for these answers and seeking them in an intentional way. So in the book, I talk about holistic wealth being intentional by design. I literally had to be this intentional where at the same time, every single day, I meditated and I prayed. And that's why that spiritual self renewal is part of that framework that I've developed for holistic wealth.
Mm-hmm.
And my intuition, like I've always been an intuitive person, but I realized that the business of life that we have and everything around us, we're not tuning into our intuition as much as we could, as when we are so intentional, we clear all the distractions around us and really focus on, that inner voice and what that voice is trying to tell us
Mm-hmm.
about our life and the way we're living. And I got a chance to do that. And the answers that I got, and the way I was able to live. And so these are only like tiny bits and pieces that I'm not even scratching the surface
Mm-hmm.
with how deep this process was for me. Because not only that, but I stayed on a property that was 1 acre. It was that big. It had fruit trees, it had herbs and vegetables and fruits, and I ate farm to table. And so lots of the lessons that I share in this book are part and parcel of that healing journey. And I talk about it as a healing journey. It was like a systems, whole, wide perspective healing journey of my mind, my body, my soul. And, I just had the chance to really focus on that. And that was invaluable.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, my thought is it sounds incredible, but it sounds funny to say it that way, knowing the catalyst for why it happened. Is like, how do you sit with that? It's like, I'm watching you talk and you're smiling as you're talking, and it seems as though you're remembering it as not only transformational, but as a positive experience. Like, did you have to reconcile the why and the outcome? And how did that feel?
Yeah, like I can look back on it and smile now, 13 years later, but I remember being on sabbatical, and I remember even at night just feeling the intense weight of grief and
Mm,
just feeling the intensity of emotion. So it was an incredible experience, when you look back. And of
mhm,
course, even going through it, there were moments of just this intense joy and laughter, even with just realizing how far I had come.
mm,
And that's towards kind of the middle to the end of that year.
mhm.
But in the beginning, I was intensely aware that I had packed up my life. I had packed up my kids.
Yeah.
I took my 3-year-old who was just starting kindergarten out of school. Like I was intensely aware of the risk that I
Yeah.
was taking to do this, to go to this place, to find those answers. And to be honest with you, I wasn't even thinking about the outcome in terms of this framework that would have come out of that experience, which is what we're talking about today. I wasn't thinking about even, how my background as an economist would have helped me develop this and that. It really just came about long after this kind of consolidation in my head
Mhm,
of kind of the meaning, and how when we slow down, and how when we really find that motivation from within, how life altering that can be.
mhm, mhm.
Mhm.
At what point because I mean, your kids were so young. At what point, like, was there a pivotal moment where it was, hey, I have to tell you about your dad now? Or did you keep his memory alive in some way for them? Or like, I don't, they were so young, right? I imagine that would be in some ways, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know how how was that when did they start to ask questions, or what did you set a plan? I'm asking you a ton of questions now because I don't really know how to ask the question. Was there a plan for how you would talk about him to your kids, or how did that come up?
Yeah, there was no plan. I didn't, and this happened so suddenly when he died. And as you mentioned, they were young. Uh, Matthew, my oldest, who was 3 at the time, had a great relationship with his dad. They were best friends. And so for Matthew, it really hit home hard. His grief was hard, and he started asking questions from day one.
Mm.
He saw his father leave in an ambulance.
Oh,
He saw that ambulance take his father away from his home, and his father never came back.
oh my God.
So, you know what happened to Matthew? Matthew would see ambulances and just burst into tears
Oh,
because
poor
an
baby.
ambulance like that took his dad and
Yeah.
never brought him back.
Yeah.
And I remember one day at school, he went to school, he was in kindergarten, and they had an ambulance come for like a show and tell for the kids.
Oh.
And he bolted down the hallways of the schools, yelling and screaming that this ambulance is here because the ambulance to him is a symbol of death and grief and of
Mm-hmm.
someone not coming back. And the
Mm.
school called me, and they, the teachers were so sad, and it broke my heart.
Yeah.
And that was one of the incidents that prompted me to do the sabbatical with him.
Mm-hmm.
And, he's asked me questions ever since
Mm.
from day one. He hasn't stopped, and he's 16 now.
Mm-hmm.
And just like 2 days ago, he asked me another question
Yeah.
because he's starting to grow a beard at 16. And he's like, did my dad have a beard?
Oh
So at
my
each
gosh. So
stage,
sweet.
of his development and his
Yeah.
life, he's asked me, so what did he do? And was he like me? Was he doing
Mm.
this at my age? So the questions never stop. They never stop. For Alex, who was 8 weeks old,
Mm-hmm.
for Alex, that was heartbreaking for me too. And I spoke about that in chapter 1 of the book,
Mm-hmm.
where I said Alex will never know his voice.
Yeah.
Alex will never remember the types of things that Matthew will,
Mm.
because Matthew has held those pieces of him in sacred vessels in his memory, but Alex was just too young to retain anything, obviously. And so I grieved for Alex too.
Yeah.
And yes, Alex still has questions and he asks me, but not as intently as Matthew, because he was only 8 weeks, and well, he didn't have anything to, to have as a piece of context or anything to go back to. And so I did keep that night when he walked, when he, went in with the ambulance to the hospital that night, you know, I mentioned in the viral article how they gave me his belongings in a white plastic bag. So
Mm-hmm.
after they pronounced him dead, they came to me with a white plastic bag with all his belongings, his ring, like
Mm.
a chain he had on, shoes, clothing, just everything he wore to the hospital that night. And I remember walking out of the hospital with that white plastic bag, and I'll never forget it.
Wow.
And there are a lot of items in that I kept in a tin, this nice tin for both of them, his wedding ring that he
Mm.
wore that night, that the chain, like the smaller items that I could keep. And so I've showed them that. And so when we've spoken about it, even when they were younger, I've gone through the items in the tin, and I've, showed them. And so we've had those times where we talk about it, and and we've done so, as you can imagine, thousands upon thousands upon thousands of times. But it's unbelievable that with kids it comes in bursts.
Mm.
Once they remember something, and then they'll just come to you and be like, so did he like Tupac Shakur? Did he like
Mm-hmm.
Beyonce? Because like they're going, like, for instance, Matthew's going through that right now, right? He's a teenager and he loves music. And he's like, so do you think he would have liked Drake? Do you think he would have liked
Oh,
so and so? And
yeah.
so it's always something related, something that's dear to them, and they wonder if, what would he have liked?
Yeah.
What would he have done and said? And so that's kind of how I've dealt with the questions over the years.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really driven by them, and the questions they've had.
Yeah. That's really sweet. Thank you for sharing that. It's something that a lot of us don't have experience with. And I think that when you don't have the experience, it feels like, oh, should we not talk about it? Should we not bring it up? Should we not ask? And the more I do ask, and you can tell me if you agree, if you feel the same, that you and your boys, you're never not thinking about it. So it's when someone asks you, it gives you a chance to to talk about your person, to talk about the person that means something to you. And unfortunately, I just think in our culture, it's grief and loss are not things that we're comfortable speaking about. And I think it's as a
Absolutely.
yeah, I think it's at a disservice to those who have lost and are sitting there like, does anyone care that this happened? You know what I mean? Like it never goes away for you.
It never goes away. And especially when you have young kids
Yeah.
who constantly need that information to tell them who they are and to
Yeah.
tell them why they have these likes and dislikes and
Yeah.
philosophies in life and to tell them why they walk like how they walk. It's because
Right.
like they walk like their dad. And you're right. I remember when it just happened and people would look at me and they knew about the death and they'd be so afraid to ask. And
Mhm.
they'd be so afraid to even give condolences.
Mhm.
And it was the worst feeling to
Yeah.
know that, okay, I know you know, and you know, I know you know, but you're not saying anything.
Right.
And it felt so bad. And so, absolutely, grief and loss are not things we discuss nearly enough. And for those who are grieving, it's a gift when you can, show that interest in a really deep way into their story and their loss and how they've coped
Mhm.
and how far they've come. It's a real gift for people to do that. And so when people ignore it, when you meet people who just think that the best way they can deal with it or the best way they know how to is to just pretend it never happened,
Mhm.
it's unreal. It's really unreal because it forces you back into a world of pretense.
Mm.
It forces you back in a world of, okay, let's just talk as if he's here and it never happened. But you know what? He's no longer here and it did happen. And my world did fall apart. My
Yeah.
world fell to pieces.
Right.
And so absolutely that's a key thing. And I absolutely hope that the conversation around grief and loss that we'll have more and more and people will talk and feel free to talk about it.
Mhm. Mhm. And before I finally transition to your expertise and the true meat of your book, I would just want to ask, I did see that you are remarried. Is How was that transition for you and your kids? And how is it for him to hear you talk about this all the time? Like, was he someone that came in comfortable to ask you questions? Like, what did all that transition look and feel like for you and the kids?
Yeah, it's funny. Just last week, I wrote a piece in the Atlanta Journal Constitution about just this, just
Mm.
dating and widowhood, and how it came into being for me that I got remarried. And I shared in that piece, in that article that's now published, that the person who I remarried was my friend, and it was a friend from the age of 4, and we were next door neighbors that knew each other from 4, and he had never married,
Mm.
but I had, and he'd always known me. Our bigger brothers were best friends, or families were family friends. And so I was most comfortable with that, knowing that I had this deep and rich relationship with this person,
Mm.
um, who knew me and would be very careful, um, and gentle with my story and my experience. And he also loved kids a lot. And for my kids, from their perspective, Matthew, the older one, kept, he kept asking for a father. He was just always like, when am I going to get a new dad? And is God going to send me a new dad? When is the new dad coming? And it was like every single day. So, I
Wow.
mean, it's so funny, when people ask the question and they think, oh, maybe there was some tension, or maybe I think that happens when your kids are far older,
Yeah.
almost adults.
Yeah.
I think when your kids are like 3, 4, they're dying, especially when they're boys. they're dying to have that someone,
Yeah.
that other male figure who loves them and will run with them and who will cheer for them. And Alex was too young. He was 8 weeks old. So my new husband is the only father Alex knows.
Yeah.
That's the only father he knows. So for
Yeah.
him, this is just dad. And I hear about this other guy, but I don't
Yeah.
really know him.
Wow.
But for
Yeah.
Matthew, it was a case of I'm so ready. Like I know God's going to send me, and when is God going to send me the new dad? And that
Wow.
was like his
Yeah.
reaction.
Yeah.
But yes, like we were friends from a young age,
Mm-hmm.
and it is always hard once you go through grief
Mm-hmm.
and you go through that dating period into remarriage. It's always hard for another person coming in,
Mm.
hearing about this person, and this person was so special in your life. But I think he just did a really good job of, and both of us realized this early, that this journey that I was on was a part of my purpose,
Mm.
and it was a part of our lives, and that he was like taking the baton to do the second phase of the journey.
Mm.
And like I'm a Christian, and when I think about my spiritual journey, and actually I have tears in my eyes because I see things as part of this continuation of the work that I'm here to do,
Mm.
and the message that I'm here to impart, with this story and this framework. And if he's here in my life to help me do that, to help me with the second part of the journey that Garfield started, that was my first husband, then that's such a special gift. And I think, he sees that. And even with the work that I do, like I founded the Institute on Holistic Wealth. When readers of the first edition of the book came back and they're like, we want to do courses, we want to be certified, he's been helping me with that whole journey. He's
Mm-hmm.
behind a lot of that work. So for us, it's like a teamwork, and it's this process of, we're continuing this work that we
Yeah.
have to do. And it's all wrapped up in his life purpose and my life purpose.
Yeah.
So we see it on such a different level
Yeah.
than people looking on would just be like, oh, I wonder how. But it's such a big part of my life purpose and my mission, and his too, that it's really become part of our combined journey.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just seeing like I'm just visualizing in neon lights like legacy. That's what I just keep thinking as you're talking is building your legacy of your life and him part of it. And it's really beautiful to hear you talk about. And I'm so happy for you. I don't know. It's very
Thank
um
you.
it's funny, we met about a half an hour ago and I'm like, you feel emotional about it because you can see your pain and your joy just in your eyes all at once. And it's very moving. But that being said, I do want to make sure that we talk about kind of the meat and potatoes of holistic wealth. What does that term mean?
Yeah, no, it's funny, and it's so wrapped up in just everything that I've said so far. So one of the reasons why we came up with the name Holistic Wealth is going back to the viral article, right? Like I shared a lot of money lessons there too.
Hmm.
Not just money lessons though. It was really from a holistic perspective. And I remember my publisher saying, yeah, let's do a money book. And I said, no, I would not be comfortable doing just a money book, because what got me over this disruption wasn't just the money. It
Mm.
was everything else that I've spoken about so far. It was those relationships. It was that spiritual self renewal, that meditation every day and spending time in nature. It was focusing on my mental and emotional health, my physical health with what I ate, the exercise, the diet, everything. And not only that, but it was finding this life purpose and a mission that gave my life so much meaning. And so financial independence and the money part of it is critical. So that's a big piece. And in the book, and in the new and expanded version of the book, you'll see the 4 parts there. And so it's there laid out very well. But that's kind of what holistic wealth means. It's how can I live my life enriching these critical pillars that are really so intertwined, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I can't be holistically wealthy if I just have all the wealth in the world,
Mm-hmm.
but I have no relationships to support me. I am, spiritually bankrupt. My mental health is a mess.
Mm.
I just cannot. And I know I could not. So these critical pillars of holistic wealth are so important. And they also form that framework that helps us to recover from disruption.
Mm-hmm.
So when I think about what we're going through with COVID, I really see this holistic wealth message and the framework that I've developed as a critical part of how we move forward and kind of that meaning that we all want and kind of how we shape our post COVID lives. So that's holistic wealth in a nutshell. Of course, there are 36 life lessons laid out in the book, and each one is a chapter. So you can imagine it's way more than I'm
Right.
speaking about
Of
right
course.
now.
Yeah.
This is the
Yeah.
view from
Yeah.
like 30,000 feet once you get into it. And this new edition, the new and expanded version, has a foreword by Kelly Rutherford, star of Gossip Girl, Melrose Place, and Dynasty. And it's updated for this new world we're living in.
Mm.
And, it really lays out what we need to have in our holistic wealth portfolio, because I think we all need to have a holistic wealth portfolio with all the critical pillars, making sure
Mm-hmm.
that we're not just standing on one or two pillars,
Mm-hmm.
that we have all of these that are enriching our lives.
Mm-hmm. I love it, and I completely agree. I do think that when we talk more literally about wealth in terms of financial wealth, we don't often connect that to mental health, but it so is like it's so connected. I've heard before um it referred to as, we all have a money story, and I've heard you talk about it as money trauma. Like, talk to me a little bit about the true financial aspect of holistic wealth, and you know what is money trauma?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're so right, because I saw a stat the other day, and I don't have it in front of me right now, but it was basically saying that the number one reason for suicides is related to money, is money related.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's on and we can see it, right? And we know we've seen what COVID-19 has done to the
Yeah.
economy globally. And we've seen what it's done to our not only our pockets, but our mental health.
Right.
And so that money trauma is also part and parcel of that, because we've gone through COVID, where we've gone through this type of collective trauma. And now we're witnessing the economy just unravel.
Mm.
Inflation is high, gas prices are high, there's rising cost of food. And so, trauma and money trauma is wrapped up in our financial well-being as well. And so I developed this money trauma course at the Institute on Holistic Wealth. It's a certification program. And as a behavioral economist, it's unbelievable how much this isn't talked about, that our money stories and how we view money starts in childhood.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of our money trauma starts in childhood, and kids start to develop their perceptions around money from age 7.
Mm.
And a lot of what they hear about money is often negative,
Right.
even in their formative years, because it's always based on our parents at home who are talking about money. And especially now, you can imagine now, right? In
Mm-hmm.
households across North America, we're dealing with high gas prices and high
Mm-hmm.
inflation, and the money messages being shared in households now is things are so expensive. I'm worried. What's
Right.
going to happen? What if I lose my job? What if this doesn't work out? I'm going to have to go to my savings, borrow money, credit cards, interest rates. And those are the words that are being thrown around
Mm-hmm.
most often in households, and how that affects kids. And that's how it starts.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, there's different levels of money trauma. And of course, it can start from childhood, and then we get re-traumatized over and over again
Mm.
throughout adulthood. And when you have a loss, a very life altering situation where, for instance, you're widowed or you're divorced, you have a critical illness or something similar, as you can imagine, money also comes to the fore. Whether you have it or not, it comes to the fore. Because I'm an economist, I was a trained economist, and I was financially independent at 31. But yet still, it does carry money to the fore because then I'm wondering, okay, with my husband gone and he was a CPA, he was an accountant, am I going to, do as well as he did with it?
Mm-hmm.
How am I going to ensure that I maximize it? What am I going to do to ensure that I sustain that pot of funds or multiple pot of funds? So as you can imagine, money, whether you have it or not, it still forms that that it's kind of like this big piece of your life that you're always thinking about,
Mm-hmm.
and it's always kind of this nerve-wracking experience. And when I think about our money stories, and I wrote an article around that, and even in the trauma course, I teach people to really look at their money stories. What are the money messages you were exposed to, and what do you think about your personal financial situation today? How does it make you feel? Does it make you feel nervous and worried and panicky?
Mm-hmm.
Or do you feel safe and secure? What are the
Mm-hmm.
feelings that come to the fore? And that's why I developed the personal financial identities quiz,
Mm-hmm.
so that people can start thinking about, okay, am I a minimalist, a maximalist? What's my money philosophy?
Mm-hmm.
What do I really feel about how I save and invest? And am I being authentic to that? Or am I following the crowd? And that came to me after the first book was published, and readers came back and they were like, we want to know how to identify our personal financial identity. So
Mm-hmm.
that's a key piece. And it can help overcome money trauma. It can help in a myriad of ways, as I've outlined in the course. And in this new edition of Holistic Wealth, there's an entire chapter on that wasn't there in the first edition. So I've really, with COVID, and, as you asked that question, I've really fleshed out those parts of the book given the situation that we're in, because I know it's just a big, big, big piece of what we're dealing with today.
Yeah. Yeah. And so this is the kind of thing that I buy. I'm all in. Like I'm sold, I'm in, I want to know more. Talk to someone who's hearing this and going, I don't think I have any of that. What and all of this maybe sounds alarmist to them, or like what are the benefits of determining our financial personality, determining what our money story and trauma is, and what are we risking by not looking into these sorts of ideas?
Absolutely. So, in terms of what we're risking our life's potential,
Mm-hmm.
and we're risking possibly millions of dollars out the door that we could have had
Mm-hmm.
if we were more self-aware and knew and really delved deeper in these issues. And I'm glad you asked that question, because as a behavioral economist, I've seen how money trauma affects risk behavior. And there's numerous studies that outline, and some of them I outline in the course, that from childhood, that money trauma leads to unrealized potential in
Mm-hmm.
terms of our investments, in terms of our money goals, and in terms of our life goals and what we're able to accomplish. Because then we tell ourselves different stories
Mm-hmm.
about money. You know what? Like, maybe I'm not deserving of money. Maybe I shouldn't try to get more money, because bad things happen sometimes when you have money. We tell ourselves these negative money stories, and then we tie our goals to goals that aren't bold enough, aren't big enough, because we
Mm-hmm.
think, maybe I shouldn't, dream bigger than this, or I've seen this fallout happen over here. So I'm just going to like hold on to this, pot of funds that I have, and not try to lose it, right? So I won't go risky on my investments, or I'll just go conservative. And I probably won't even beat inflation with what, I'm getting for my returns, but that's fine, because I
Mm-hmm.
know I won't lose it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's
Mm-hmm.
different things. And it's so funny you asked that, because I just contributed to this article on Mail magazine about money trauma, and about how financial survivors guilt, which is, you know, can lead to money trauma, how that can affect our investments and what we do, and the potential we're able to realize. So what I want to get out there to people listening is that the cost of not delving deeper, the cost of not paying attention to your personal financial identity and knowing how to harness the strengths of that and to rein in the weaknesses can result in millions of dollars in losses.
Mm-hmm.
And there's hundreds of stories that I can point to about why that's the case.
Mm-hmm.
I even that article I just mentioned in Mel magazine just now, I know of widows. I've spoke to many who've gotten a payout from a life insurance policy, for instance, and have said, this is like blood money to me. I don't
Mm-hmm.
want anything to do with it
Mm-hmm.
because it's coming from loss.
Yeah.
It's coming from the death of somebody I love way too much for me to even touch it. I will not touch it. I will not spend it. And so that money trauma can really affect what we do and how we maximize it, right? So that could be in the millions
Right.
of losses because we're not maximizing its potential. And the other thing is some people are also, because they don't know their personal financial identity, and especially as women, we're not as confident with our money decisions, right? And so
Right.
if a spouse dies, or we go through a divorce, we go through a critical illness, or just a single mom, we think, you know what, maybe I'm not as good with money. you know
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I should just tread this very safe path,
Mm-hmm.
even if we're natural risk takers. So in the quiz, people will find out if they're natural risk takers or not, and how to harness that. I'm a risk taker. And if I had not harnessed the strengths of that, I
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't have taken the risks that I needed to have taken to get my family on a path to financial independence. And that is the loss that people can have if they don't know to harness this. Like, I had a sense from I was like really young that I was a risk taker, but going through this experience and being a behavioral economist taught me so much about why I needed to harness the strengths. Like, accept it that you're a risk taker. If you're a minimalist, accept it, but just know what you need to do to
Mm-hmm.
put things in place so that you're harnessing the strengths and that you're not focusing on the weaknesses. Because
Mm-hmm.
that's another thing that we do. We focus on the weaknesses and not the strengths. So I could talk all day about this, but I think I'm giving a really compelling argument. I hope I am, for why people need to pay attention.
Yeah. Is is the financial personality something that you would say could evolve over time? Like, I'm thinking of, I'm pretty young in my like independent financial life. I'm not far off from being under my parents' roof in the grand scheme of things. And the way I would have thought about money then is different than the way I think about it now. And I can
Absolutely.
imagine and somewhat hope that the way I think about it another 10 years from now is going to be different as well.
Absolutely. And that's why it's very important for us to do this work of assessing our money traumas in life
Hmm.
and really, fleshing out our money story. So I host the Holistic Wealth podcast.
Hmm.
And so for every guest that I interview, I ask them about the quiz and their results. And
Mm,
what we've realized with over, 1,000 people taking the quiz now is that so many people do evolve, and
mm,
they do evolve out of that money trauma.
mm,
I'm just thinking about Jessica Morehouse now, who took the quiz. She's also a podcast host. She's the host of the More Money podcast. And she said to me, and listeners can go back and listen to that episode. I think she started out as an anxious spender because of how she grew up
mm,
and the money messages that she heard. And she has evolved now into a full blown risk taker. Not only is she's an entrepreneur, but she started out very young. She
mhm,
left her corporate job in her 20s and at a young age, and she's fully now coming to her own. So she's shed that anxious spender kind of, identity that was kind of, not forced upon her, but was influenced by her parents and the messages she got. And she has, evolved into that version of herself that's more authentic
mhm,
and based on what she wants in life. And there's stories like that
mhm,
on the podcast that people can listen to of how people have responded to this. They've done the work, and and have come out saying, you know what, I started this journey as an anxious spender, and now I've fully come into my own as whatever I am now, because none of the personalities are bad. They're all equal, and they all have strengths and weaknesses. Whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
right? Living that authentic life really means that we have to be self-aware,
Mm-hmm.
that we know how to advocate for ourselves, so self-advocacy and self-preservation, and that's what the quiz enables.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, absolutely, there are cases of, well-known cases of people in the personal finance community who've said it to me. I also interviewed Dr. Nicole LaPere. She's known as the holistic
Mm-hmm.
psychologist, and her episode is on money trauma, period, like the entire episode.
Right.
And she said to me, and she's a well-known psychologist, that she wished she had that quiz earlier in her life, because
Mm-hmm.
she said when she took it, it was unbelievable, the insights, even as a psychologist, that she got. And she's also been through money trauma. So that's some of the feedback, definitely, that I've got from even renowned, people in the community. And I'm just glad that, whatever road that I've been through, no matter how hard it was,
Mm-hmm.
that it can be meaningful for others who are sharing this journey with me now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I made a note because I had it jotted down, and you mentioned it, the financial survivor's guilt. You know, the idea of someone, like you said, the insurance money, like that's an example of that. And are there other examples of what that could look like?
That financial trauma.
The
Yeah.
survivor's guilt around money. I mean,
Yes, absolutely. So the financial survivor's guilt can look like survivor's guilt in general, where you think, I'm undeserving of the money.
mm,
I don't have the confidence to do anything with the money. This person should be here, and not the money.
yeah.
And it's just the feelings that the money creates that causes the trauma too, right? It's the feelings of,
Mm,
this is horrible. Look at what I've been through, and now I have this, that causes
yeah.
that level of trauma.
It's making me think, like, on one hand, money in our culture is something that we all strive for, we all want more of, and yet in that situation, and I'm sure there are others, money has this sort of ick factor sometimes, right? It's like we can't grieve and have money. We can't, we like it's I don't know. I feel like there's on one hand, like I said, we all want money, we all want more of it, and our culture idolizes money and luxury and wealth and excessive wealth. But if you acknowledge wealth, or if you talk about it in a certain way, like there's a negativity sometimes associated with it too. It's,
Yeah.
why do we do this to ourselves? Like, why why do we make, why, like, we make ideas and concepts and things that we all deal with and we all go through and we all experience, we just complicate the crap out of them.
Yeah,
Like, it's it's just money, right? Like,
absolutely.
it's not, why
Absolutely.
does it say, it, like, we feel like we have to make it say something about us, and it's like
I uh-huh, yeah,
it's
absolutely. It's
money.
just a tool. Money
Yes.
is just a tool.
Yes, yes.
It's a tool that can help you have time freedom, and a certain level of freedom to do what you want to do when you can. Like, for instance, if you want to take a break,
Right,
from work, or you want
right.
to take a break from running your business, it's a tool to enable. It softens the blow too, right? When
Yeah.
we have a loss, whether it's the death of a loved one or divorce or critical illness, it definitely softens that landing.
Right.
Whereas we would have landed hard on concrete and be bruised and battered, money has that soft landed that prevents that. But it does not, and it cannot, absolutely cannot compensate
Right.
for the loss. It can't give us that meaningful life. It can't give us that level of personal satisfaction that we need, that we get from other areas in our lives, from our
Mhm.
relationships and our loved ones and family. It can't bring our loved ones back. So it's a tool, and that's
Mhm.
what I see it as. And that's why you're right. when I was asked to write a money book, just a money book. And I could easily have written a book on how I became a millionaire at 31. But that to me was not the message that I
Mm-hmm.
necessarily wanted to send. And if you Google me or my work, that's not what you'll see as the main message.
Right.
I wanted to send a wholesome message to everyone that yes, it can be a tool. And we need to combine it with these other factors for us to have that type of lasting happiness and joy. Because you see celebrities that commit suicide, and
Right.
every single time we see it in the news, everybody's for how can they be so rich? How can they have so much money, but yet still they're so unhappy because our mental health is so important? That's why.
Right.
It's because there are other things that are more important.
Right.
So it's a tool, and I'm glad that you brought that up because that's how I felt. And
Mm-hmm.
even in the throes of my grief and loss, it came home to me as plain as day that it did not give me that joy and happiness in the moment
Mm-hmm.
that I was grieving. It helped me to take a break. It helped me to take care of my kids. It's very important, but it cannot, absolutely cannot be the be all and end all because it just can't give me that level of satisfaction or joy that I need to have a holistically wealthy life, which is kind of what the message is now with saying, yeah, it's one pillar,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not everything. Like you'll still be misaligned, you'll still be imbalanced, you still probably won't be able to stand
Right.
without the other pillars, like what we're seeing with the suicide rates increasing during COVID-19. So absolutely,
Yeah.
um, that's a really important point.
Yeah. And I'm thinking as you're talking, as far as the pillars go, I could, if I, put my pen to paper, come up with some really important points of messaging that I would want to share with my kids. When it comes to the financial pillar, what advice do you have for parents as far as how to talk to our children about money or not talk to them about it, or where to, and I'm sure like another 3 hours of conversation, but where do we start with, trying to talk to our kids about money and everything that we've just been talking about?
Yeah, and that's so important because people have been asking me for a kid's version of this book. Librarians and
Yes.
teachers have been asking me
Yes.
for that. They're like, we need a
Yes.
kid's version. This
Totally.
is so important.
Yes.
And I agree. Like I completely agree wholeheartedly because one of the main messages I have in the book, and this is something I want to teach my kids too, is that your self-worth
Mm,
isn't tied to your net worth. And I mean, I know that's, kind of when they get into adulthood, but we want to say to them even now that how you treat people, how you talk to people, how you view people shouldn't just be based on money and what they have
mhm,
and how you perceive them, as being rich or how wealthy you perceive them to be. But in terms of money, in terms of like hardcore money principles that I teach my kids now, a lot of it is wrapped up in gratitude. I
mhm,
try not to be too overly negative when I'm talking about money around them, especially now with the headlines on, like if you go on CNN, it's all about high inflation and rising rates. We started a gratitude jar during
mhm,
COVID-19 and we popped messages in there about what we're grateful for.
hmm,
And I teach them that with money, there are trade-offs.
hmm,
We can't, try to get everything or aim to spend every dime we have.
mhm,
So it's all about a trade-off. So if you have this pot of funds that you get for your allowance as a child, what do you want, and how are you going to spend that, right? And you're going to have to make that decision based on trade-offs. So I do teach my kids that as well. And of course, the money messaging as parents is also very important. So, I always tell people try not to pass on too much negativity about money to them. Try to talk about money in positive terms, that it's a tool that
mm,
can enable them to do certain things and to enrich their lives and the lives of others around them. And it's funny, my kids know their personal financial identities already. So my 13-year-old knows his, And my 16-year-old is fundamentally a minimalist. And it shows in everything he does, and he's embraced it.
Mm-hmm.
And he's already said to me that, when he gets married, he gets, kids, how he will raise them in terms of, how a minimalist would raise a child. And so I'm also imploring parents to start talking about that. So,
Right.
like, if you take the quiz and you know your personal financial identity, talk to your kids about your money values,
Mm-hmm.
because we all have money values. We all ascribe values to the things we invest in, the things we spend on, and why. So,
Mm-hmm.
like, even in the book, I talk about the importance of meaningful experiences.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, I'll say to my kids, you know, if I'm going on a vacation, we're going on a vacation as a family, this is a part of my value in terms of spending time with you. So this is not just about spending the money. This is me investing in that family time with you because I value that and I
Mm-hmm.
value you so much. And this is what the money as a tool is enabling us to do.
Mm-hmm.
So it's talking about your personal financial identity, why you make the decisions you're making, along with your own values. So, say if you do, you invest in companies that are doing good for the environment, and
Mm-hmm.
even if you go to the store and you pick up, paper straws and not plastic straws, talk to your kids about how you're using that money and why, because we're saving the environment.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know, like in the book, I have a whole chapter on that in terms of holistic wealth, because that's also important. So I think there are so many teachable moments that we can have with our
Mm-hmm.
kids and explaining why we're making the money decisions we're making, and how our money philosophy and our money identities have to do with that, and how we embrace it.
Mm-hmm.
And in that Holistic Wealth podcast episode that I spoke about earlier with Dr. Nicole Lepera, we also spoke about parenting there, and how, parents can impart positive money values and positive money habits to kids. But it's something that I'm working through too in terms of developing a book on it, because I think
Mm-hmm.
it's so important,
Yeah.
so important, the messages that we give kids around money.
Yeah. Yeah. I will link the couple of episodes that you've mentioned in the show notes. And I think, to kind of wrap things a little bit up here, my audience is mostly women, mostly moms. And I think just stereotypically, right, highly generalized, a lot of us, including myself, are in a household where my husband does the finances. I know a little bit, but I don't know a lot. And I think for a lot of us, this whole world feels very intimidating, very overwhelming. What's a word of advice? What's a piece of wisdom for someone listening to this and going, oh my gosh, I don't even know where to start. I don't even know if I want to get involved with this. Like, what do you say to her?
Absolutely. And it's so funny. I am a trained economist, and sometimes I feel the same way. So before my husband died, because he was an accountant, I used to delegate everything to him because he loved saving receipts, and he'd do the spreadsheets, and he did our taxes at tax time. And I was just happy just delegating, because
Yeah.
I was just like, who wants to think about that? I don't. I
Mm-hmm.
don't like spreadsheets, and I'm an economist. So I can
Right.
imagine, and I don't like certain things. I don't like taxes, and I don't like tax planning. I
Right.
don't like certain things. So it was after he died that I had to own up in a big way, reluctantly. Yeah, but I had to do it. And so first things first is, and this saved me actually. So we say this to a lot of moms listening in. So we had this box, and you can use a shoebox. You can go to Walmart and get one of those big portfolio type boxes, the
Mm-hmm.
ones with a flap, with a lock, and you save all your critical documents in there. So
Mm-hmm.
everything from your mortgages to your leases to student loans, past tax, tax
Returns and
receipts or
such.
tax
Yeah.
returns, exactly, and put everything in there. And the two of you know where it's kept. So you have
Mm-hmm.
that special place you keep it,
Mm-hmm.
and you can go in it and check it from time to time and add. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and that's one practical step. And the other practical step is, whoever's doing the budgeting in the home, just start participating. So
Mm-hmm.
the two of you can have like a money date night. sit down with a glass of wine, look at the spreadsheet, and you don't even have to look intently. I don't, because guess what? I don't even do it in my household now. So I complete, and I'm the economist. I don't do it because
Yeah.
I don't like Excel. So he opens it up. I look at it and I'm like, yeah, I browse through and all looks well. And you
Hmm.
can do that. And like just act interested. If you find like you're faking it,
Fake it
just
till
tell
you make
yourself,
it. Yeah.
fake it till you make it. Just act
Yeah.
like you're interested. Convince your brain that this is
Yes.
so fun, and you're looking at it, and like, yeah, I have an idea of our budget. So that's your budget, right? And
Yeah.
then when it comes on to the investment plans, just sit down and like go over all your money goals together. So
Mm.
when it's if it's that money date night time, you go over all your money goals and even the debt, and think about how you're clearing them off and the strategies that you're putting in place. How much per month goes to this? In the Holistic Wealth Personal Workbook, there's a debt repayment spreadsheet that's
Okay.
helpful, and readers can grab that. If and you know what, the workbook is also very helpful for designing a personal mission statement,
Hmm.
and you can add your personal money mission statement under there as a couple, and your values in terms of where you're going with your money and why you're making the spending decisions as a family. And those
Hmm.
are some practical steps that you can go through to kind of empower yourself to feel like, what, I'm involved.
Hmm.
I'm involved. I know what we're doing and I know why we're spending and saving on the things we are. And you know what? As a couple, do the personal financial identity quiz,
Yeah.
because it's hardly ever the case that the both of you are the same.
Right. Right.
Right? Like
Yeah.
it's highly likely that one will be a minimalist and a maximalist, or a risk taker and an anxious spender, and you can imagine the dynamics, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
as you go through that and you're like, yeah, but I'm a minimalist and he's a risk taker. How am I ever you start negotiating and talking. And then
Yeah.
that empathy comes forward, because
Mm.
then when you go through the quiz and you go through your childhood around money and you realize that, hey, you know what? Maybe this is why I'm having those feelings. And then you can empathize and come up with a way forward.
Hmm.
And I know, that's a quick overview, but there's so many ways of doing it so that you can feel involved and you don't feel like, you know what, I don't know what's going on. And if something were to happen tomorrow, it would be bad. So
Yeah.
those are a few tips among
Yeah.
others. And you know what? Get a copy. The book, the Holistic Wealth Expanded and Updated book, is on sale now for 78 cents, the ebook on Amazon
It's
during the
amazing.
month of June.
Hmm.
Get that book. See if you can read it together
Yeah.
and just formulate a plan going forward. I
Yeah.
think you'll feel so much more empowered when you do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I'm on it.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, Keisha, this was amazing. I know I could ask you 350,000 more questions, but I really appreciate your time and you've given me a lot to think about. I am excited to get my hands on this ebook. Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. And you're welcome. And I hope you'll reach out and listeners will reach out and let me know what they think.
Such a powerful story. Oh my goodness. I got emotional hearing it the first time, then again in the editing process, and again just now. Keisha, thank you so much for your honesty and your bravery, your vulnerability in sharing your story. It's so moving. And I absolutely love Keisha's message. Wealth incorporates every aspect of our lives, they're intertwined, and like making the connection between money and mental health. I mean, duh, like it's so obvious, but why don't we talk about it more? I mean, I know money is tricky. And if I'm honest, I don't like talking about it much, but Keisha is so right. That doesn't stop me from thinking about it all the time. So I am just itching to get into Keisha's book. It is on sale if you're listening to this in real time. It is on sale, the ebook, for 78 cents for the month of June 2022. And I'm just really looking forward to learning more and unpacking more of my own money story and philosophy. All of the links to Keisha's book, quiz, and podcast are in the show notes. And before we go our separate ways, I have to remind you of the amazingness that is Modern Mom Style Box. Tara Clark, who you all know and love from the super popular Instagram account Modern Mom Probs, and from episode 3 of this podcast, launched an amazing new clothing rental service. Modern Mom Style Box makes it easy to wear new clothes all month long without any stress or commitment. From seasonal staples to statement pieces, rent unlimited looks for just one flat fee of $60 a month. Take it from me, you're going to want this. The link and details are in the show notes. See you next time. Bye. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Sass Says is a production of Luann Nigara Inc. This podcast is meant to be educational and not meant to replace professional therapy or professional medical attention. To learn more about today's show and what's new in my world, head over to sasssays.com. Thanks so much. Talk later.